It's the 5th of February 1943 at the Olympia Stadium, Detroit, Michigan. Sugar Ray Robinson enters the ring to face his latest opponent. At this point in his career, Robinson has fought 40 professional bouts, not losing one, and has been dazzling audiences since his amateur days. Tonight is a rematch. The man standing across from the ring is Jake LaMotta. The last time these two men met, LaMotta was described as a human truck. Robinson had won the match with what looked like relative ease on the scorecards, and the audience had shown their approval. Giving away £10, he had used his superior footwork and exemplified the art of boxing in the eyes of many. However, there were still others who betrayed their primal lust for the gladiatorial roots of pugilism. They saw no entertainment value in a fighter dancing outside of harm's way. The real fight for them occurred in the pocket, the true test of warriors where the battle glory is earned. They also asked, what would happen if the truck caught up with the dancer? Tonight, they would find out. But this would be like no rematch Sugar Ray Robinson had fought in his career. When it is over, the previously smitten audience will fall in love with the clash of styles and will clamour for more. Jake LaMotta would later remark that he met Robinson so many times that they almost got married. It therefore seems apt that 4 of these meetings occur in February. 8 years and 9 days to this fateful rematch, the Robinson-LaMotta feud will culminate in dramatic fashion. The fight inspired books, films, articles and boxing lore. Their Bloody Valentine. Don't let anything without a heart beat you. Sugar Ray Robinson. There is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow men. True nobility lies in being superior to your former self. Ernest Hemingway. Walker Smith Jr. was born in Ailey, Georgia on the 3rd of May 1921. He was the youngest of 3 children. Living in the South, life was tough for the Smiths as much as it was for any African Americans living in an oppressive society in a time when racial tensions were at an all-time high. Nevertheless, a spirit of progress pervaded the family and would be fully realised in young Walker. His father, Walker Smith Sr., struggled to make ends meet as a farmer of cotton, peanuts and corn, and moved his family to Detroit following the hopes so many others had done in moving north to the city. Here he laboured in construction and then moved on to working 2 jobs as a cement mixer and sewage worker. His son later reflected how much he missed this busy man, who he only really saw on Sundays. At age 12, Walker Jr.'s parents separated. He moved with his mother, Layla, and 2 sisters, Marie and Evelyn, to live in New York City and went to school in the Bronx, originally aspiring to be a doctor. However, the tumultuous times made such dreams seem highly unlikely at the time, and he dropped out of school in the 9th grade, joining a street gang to make ends meet. This quickly got him into trouble. However, he was offered an alternative route, boxing. Local community groups were encouraging at-risk youths like Walker Smith Jr. away from the streets and into the ring. This particular youth didn't need to be asked twice. His life became boxing as he was taken under the wing of George Gainford, a man who would become his manager and trainer. During those adolescent years, his mother would worry that there was something wrong with her boy as he shadowboxed his way down the street, never missing an opportunity to practice his head movement. Years later, he will say, quote, "To be a champion, you have to believe in yourself when nobody else will," end quote. Marginalised ethnicities who were living below the breadline and under the heel of racial prejudice in early 20th century USA found inspiration in world champion fighters who represented their people. A Jewish underclass facing a growing genocidal enemy and the international conspiracism it encouraged wherever they lived, drew strength from the masterful jabbing wonder that was Benny the Ghetto Wizard Leonard, or the murderous trebuchet-like knockout power of the charismatic Max Baer, and the brave, defiant resilience of Barney Ross. Likewise, the Italian immigrants could find cathartic release in the aggression of Lou Ambers, or marvel at the inimitable Tony Canzonieri, and have their own knockout king in the form of the giant Primo Carnera. Even one of the smallest minority groups at the time, the Filipinos, had been able to celebrate World Championship glory for the first time with the brilliant, if short, career of the first world flyweight champion recognised by Ring magazine, Pancho Villa. However, for Walker Smith Jr., none compared to the three-division world champion Henry Hurricane Hank Armstrong, and the first black man to win the world heavyweight title in 22 years, and the second black man to win the title in history, Joe the Brown Bomber Louis. Smith had grown up on the same street in Detroit as Louis. In fact, before Smith moved to the Bronx, he had already begun boxing down the local recreation centre, and it was here where he saw an aspiring Joe Louis Barrow in the flesh. On some occasions, he even had the privilege of carrying his hero's bag to the gym. Armstrong and Louis were almost like religious figures at Walker Smith's second gym, Salem Crescent in Harlem. Both won their titles and gave the African-American boxers a real sense of hope in their chosen sport. Armstrong had even won his 3 titles inside of 10 months. Despite idolising these two figures throughout his childhood, young Walker couldn't have developed into a more different fighter. Henry Armstrong perfected a swarming style of fighting, where he closed the distance on opponents with a hopping lead hook before spending the majority of his time pinning them with his head, shoulder and elbow as he delivered punishing overhands and body shots. Joe Louis was a minimalistic and carefully measured fighter, often described as a mechanical wonder. He and Walker Smith Jr. may have shared the same category of fighting style, the boxer-puncher, but their approaches were diametrically opposed. However, what Smith did share with these two fighters, as we will see, was devastating knockout power. Walker Smith Jr.'s skills were recognised early at Salem Crescent. Displaying what would be a familiar trait for him, Smith was fighting above his natural category and easily handling the competition. In this instance, it was his age bracket. At just 15, he was ready to fight as an adult amateur, but the Amateur Athletic Union prohibited fighters entering who were under the age of 18. The solution to the problem gave the young wonder a new identity. An older boxer at his gym, by the name of Ray Robinson, allowed Walker Smith to enter the tournament using his AAU card. Although this would become his fighting name, it wasn't the last name he adopted as a pseudonym to circumvent the rules. In 1938, he was put up against another rising amateur that would become a legend in the professional ranks, future world featherweight champion Willie Will-O-the-Wisp Pep. A fight was arranged in a feed store in Norwich, Connecticut. At the time, Connecticut was a rare state that allowed amateurs to make money when they fought. By this time, there was plenty of talk about Ray Robinson of New York. So, he adopted yet another name, lost to history, in order to get a payday in another state. Willie Pep, who would go on to win 229 of his 241 professional fights, and didn't know the reputation of the man he was fighting at the time, said his mystery opponent was, quote-unquote, all over me. In 1939, at a bout in Watertown, New York, George Gainford overheard a lady in the audience declare that Ray Robinson was as sweet as sugar. Walker Smith Jr. was no more. The world would know him as Sugar Ray Robinson. Even when I was hurt, I was always the aggressor, no matter what. Jake LaMotta. How his hatred seethed in search of a justifiable excuse. Norman Mailer. Jacoby Jake LaMotta was another kid educated in the Bronx and was saved from a life of crime by his skills as a boxer. LaMotta was born on Lower East Side Manhattan on the 10th of July 1922 to a second-generation American-Italian immigrant mother and a first-generation Sicilian immigrant father. Whereas Walker Smith Jr. had yearned for more time spent with his overworked father, Jake LaMotta described his own as the only man he ever feared. Due to the aggressive yanking of one of his ears, he would undergo an operation on his mastoid, leaving him with hearing difficulties for the rest of his life. His father's beatings weren't the only ones he suffered at a young age. The same parent regularly got him involved in organised street fights, where the locals would throw pennies into the ring for LaMotta Sr. to collect towards the rent. LaMotta's upbringing on the Lower East Side meant that he was a contemporary of fellow future world middleweight champion Rocky Graziano. Both boys became notorious for getting into trouble wherever they went. Jake would later quip, quote, "We were the first juvenile delinquents," end quote. They'd also both find themselves in reformatories. Graziano's widow, Norma, will be less complimentary of LaMotta in an interview she will give in 2003. Quote, "We all came from the Lower East Side. Rocky and Jake were from the same era, but I can't deny that's all they had in common. Look, I don't like the man, but Jake was a great fighter. Rocky and me, we both respected Jake as a fighter." End quote. The LaMotta family briefly moved to Philadelphia, but soon returned to settle in the Bronx. Trouble followed Jake wherever he went, and he soon ended up in the notorious Coxsackie Reformatory for delinquent youths, after either a failed burglary or because he was in possession of burgling tools. Jake can't remember. Going by Jake LaMotta's own confessions, this was one of his lesser crimes. He will later admit to raping a woman, and on one occasion he believed he had murdered a local bookie, Harry Gordon. LaMotta had followed Gordon, who had had his days taken stuffed into his wallet, and beaten him over the head with a piece of lead piping before stealing the money. For years he had the belief that he was a murderer hanging on to his conscience. Whilst doing time at the reformatory, he discovered boxing as an alternative future path to crime. He later reflected on his time there, his style, and the way he led his life. Quote, "Forward, always moving forward. From the time I can remember, a kid, I was short and the big guys would take advantage. I had to turn myself into a body puncher. By that time I was in reform school. They'd have a boxing match every week. They'd bring guys in from outside to fight me." End quote. Upon leaving Coxsackie, LaMotta didn't look back. His amateur career saw him win every single match, and his relentless style of fighting would earn him the nickname, the Bronx Bull. Sugar Ray Robinson's rise was meteoric to say the least. In 1939 he won both the Intercity Golden Gloves and New York City Golden Gloves Championship at featherweight. The following year he won them both again at lightweight. His final amateur victory was a second-round knockout of Andy Nanella. It was claimed that he finished this preliminary boxing career with a record of 85 wins, 69 of them coming via knockout, with no losses or draws. Ben Myers is an experienced, multifaceted martial arts teacher who has been training in boxing since he was 5. He's trained with some of the best coaches in the business and regularly interviews some of the most knowledgeable fighters and teachers on his Finding the Truth podcast.
Sugar Ray Robinson is the exemplification of the term violent ballet. There's no doubt. He's the number one guy on almost everybody's number one pound for pound of all time list.
Within 2 years of his professional debut, it becomes evident to the thousands of spectators who witness his fights that Sugar Ray Robinson possesses an uncanny range of skills. So many that few experts will agree on his best attribute. Despite having undeniably impressive concussive power in his punches, he also has phenomenal hand speed augmented by sharp accuracy. No single boxer in the history of the sport had balanced these three areas so well. Robinson is the man that will inspire boxing commentators and journalists to use the term best pound-for-pound fighter. Decades later, even the great Muhammad Ali, at the height of his powers and self-aggrandizing rhetoric, will use this very description to single out his hero.
He's still my idol. If I said anybody was greater than me, Sugar Ray Robinson. God will punish me if I don't give credit where it's due. It was this man that inspired me watching him fight. I mean, he had a style.
Robinson's lead hand will dexterously change position to throw a variety of punches, including his signature jab to the body to a vicious left hook to the head. His body jab, although an effective tool for switching levels and keeping his head off the centre line, tantalisingly puts his face close to an opponent's fists. Many would take the bait and fall into his traps, resulting in taking hacks to the left kidney from his right hook or his creatively angled overhand right. When he wasn't using his jab as an attacking tool to set up various combinations, Robinson would slip perilously to the inside of an opponent's jab and begin his lead side onslaught there. This is where his jabs now curl into vicious hooks. His left hook is just as adaptable as his jab. He will whip it into the head and body or send it in as a double, setting up for power shots. Furthermore, as David Christian will describe in his Modern Martial Artist vlog, Robinson is not shy to double up on his double-ups, and if that wasn't enough, would coordinate it with repositioning footwork. If you're not on the receiving end of Robinson's multiple lead hand attacks, the chances are you're being set up for his rear hand power shots. We have already heard about his right hook to the kidneys, but one of his favoured Sunday punches is his lethal fight-ending uppercut to the jaw. Chances are, if his left and right hooks don't get you, then his destructive technique will. The rear uppercut, one of the riskiest punches of all, demonstrates Robinson's superb timing as he uses it as a counter move to jabbing opponents and swarmers like Jake LaMotta. As far as defence goes, Robinson's footwork will become the stuff of legend and will inspire future greats such as Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard. He shuffles, shifts laterally and demonstrates an almost supernatural instinct for range. Crediting David Christian again for his observation and apt musical simile, another feature of Robinson's defence was the way he could pivot in a crouched stance, almost like a conductor taking a bow. Given that Robinson described rhythm as being fundamentally important to boxing, it seems appropriate that his crouched pivot was performed as an exiting technique, a way of saying, "Thank you for the rhythmic performance I've just put on." This was far from his only retreating technique. In fact, Robinson's defence is equal to his offence in its sophistication, and he rarely leaves a heated exchange in a bad position, but often a superior one. This allows him to angle off on the back foot and throw effective counters to a pursuing opponent. Finally, just to provide an idea of why Robinson so perfectly fits the description of a boxer-puncher, a fighter who has all the answers at all ranges, it's worth briefly touching on his tactics at close range. Although stylistically a very different type of boxer to his hero, Henry Armstrong, Sugar Ray Robinson does take at least one significant move from his approach. When moving in close, Robinson uses his shoulder, or head, to post against an opponent, allowing more freedom to tear into the body. Above all else, Robinson's exemplification of his boxer-puncher status can be seen in the way he can seamlessly shift between ranges and predict his opponent's moves. Sharing at least an equal love for singing and dancing, Sugar Ray Robinson described his approach to the fight game succinctly. Quote, "Rhythm is everything in boxing. Every move you make starts with your heart, and that's in rhythm, or you're in trouble. Your rhythm should set the pace of the fight. If it does, then you penetrate your opponent's rhythm. You make him fight your fight, and that's what boxing is all about." End quote. Jake LaMotta will always know his shortcomings. Short being the operative word, at least in one department. Examinations of the best boxers in history, indeed most professional boxers, will reveal a strong positive ape index. Their arms are proportionally long for their bodies. LaMotta has a negative 2.6-inch ape index. His fists are also small and will both have been broken at least 6 times by the time he retires. When we look at the best swarmers in boxing history, LaMotta is always mentioned alongside Jack Dempsey, Henry Armstrong, Rocky Marciano, Joe Frazier, Roberto Duran and Mike Tyson. However, all of these men were noted for possessing serious knockout ability comparable with the best sluggers who ever donned the gloves. Despite having a stocky stature, this does not provide LaMotta with a compensation of force behind his short arm blows. In this sense, the Bronx Bull becomes one of the purest swarmers in the game. In order to compensate for his lack of concussive force, he more than makes up for it in his aggressive pressure-fighting style. LaMotta bullies his opponents by charging forward and cutting off the ring before launching relentless two-fisted assaults. His entire strategy consists of drawing fighters into brawls, where he will wear them down with powerful shots to the body. Although many in-fighters have to accept the inevitability that their strategy will involve taking 1 or 2 punches in order to break through, LaMotta seemed happy to take 10. He has gained a reputation for being fearless in this approach, withstanding almost impossible punishment. A childhood of fighting and abuse has enabled him to build up an incredible resilience and fortitude, along with sophisticated methods for rolling with punches. Ben Myers.
When you look at the sheer toughness of the guy, it's hard to deny that he was a great, great fighter. And then when you really start to examine the subtlety of LaMotta's game, you see that woven within what, if at a quick glance, might look like a brawler or a raging bull, as his ring name would suggest, there's some really slick boxing in there. Yes, he lacked power, so he didn't have the knockout punch to put people down that, some other greats had. But I think people are just too quick to dismiss the guy based on his fight record or the lack of championships belts that he held. But LaMotta was no slouch. LaMotta was a really good fighter.
Years later, LaMotta would put a lot of this down to his particularly thick skull, and also on how he developed a type of self-hypnosis, allowing him to tolerate huge amounts of pain. He will quip to the Observer newspaper in 2003, quote, "Pain never meant anything to me. I was the kind of guy who could go to the dentist without Novocaine. I did stupid things like that. Looking back, I realise now that I was using self-hypnosis, and the fact is, I can hypnotise others as well as myself." End quote. There's something else ever present in LaMotta. He's a man who will always enjoy the attention the spotlight gives him, but this will be contrasted with an undeniable degree of self-loathing. After he had retired from the fight game, he will make the following self-analysis. Quote, "I took unnecessary punishment when I was fighting. Subconsciously, I didn't know it then, I fought like I didn't deserve to live." End quote. By the time Robinson and LaMotta met for the first time on the 2nd of October 1942, the Bronx Bull had a record of 25 wins, 4 losses and 2 draws. 2 of his losses had been with Jimmy Reeves. The first one had been a controversial split decision, resulting 20 minutes of booing and fighting in the audience. LaMotta's ferocity ensured that whomever he fought, the audience was going to get their money's worth. A match-up with the artistically brilliant Robinson already seemed like an exciting prospect, even with both still several years away from getting their title shots. This would be Robinson's chance to try out the middleweight division, having already laid waste to every welterweight put in his way. Robinson's record stood at 35-0, and the bookies made him the 5-1 favourite. It proved to be accurate. The Associated Press said, quote, "Putting on a dazzling show of speed and slugging for the entertainment of the near-capacity crowd, many of whom were in town for tomorrow's World Series game, Robinson solved the Bronx Belter's peculiar style in 1 round, and from there on he did just about all the punching. As a matter of fact, Robinson moved so fast and hit so hard and often that LaMotta must have thought he was in the ring with a combination of St. Louis Cardinals base running and New York Yankees slugging. The Bronx Cruncher was a willing and rugged workman, but he was completely outclassed. Except for the first round in which his style bothered the Harlem Hammer and the 7th when he connected with several wild hooks, Jake had a rough crossing throughout." End quote. The United Press have been less complimentary, totally underappreciating LaMotta's incredible chin. They said the crowds had booed Robinson for his inability to put away his awkward opponent. However, what hadn't been mentioned was the promise LaMotta exhibited in the opening round. This was when the Bronx Bull had scored a knockdown against Robinson. Such a feat had given the crowds the drama they wanted. Robinson's ability to bounce back and take control of the fight, ensuring it ran on his terms and wisely from the outside for the remaining 9 rounds, was probably what got the now expectant crowds showing their disapproval. For LaMotta and other keen observers of the sport, the knockdown had been telling. Robinson was not invincible.
There's also, in reality, a huge case to be made for the fact that it's not that LaMotta or many of the others in that weight class at the time were bad. It's just that Sugar Ray Robinson was so good that the sheer monolithic greatness of his skill set overshadowed everyone else and made them look like a bunch of slouches. Sugar Ray Robinson could dance with the best dancers. He tap danced, he slid, he did all of the things that everyone is supposed to do as a boxer. He had power in both hands. He had incredible movement dynamics within the ring, incredible ring generalship. He had the ability to dominate anyone. To be honest, it's why I don't like him. It's like, it's almost annoying to watch somebody that's that good. It grates on you like nails on a chalkboard. There's just so many natural gifts in play. It can become hard to watch because it's so effortless.